We need to talk, Joseph. I looked up from my coffee to see three of my closest friends standing at my apartment door. Leon, Sarah, and Tom wore expressions I'd never seen before. A mix of concern and frustration that made my stomach drop. "This is about the faith thing, isn't it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. They walked in without invitation. Sarah sat across from me while Leon and Tom remained standing, like they were conducting some kind of intervention. "Joseph, we've been friends for 15 years, Sarah began. "We've been through everything together. College, breakups, job losses, your mom's cancer scare. But this," she gestured vaguely in the air, "this Jesus stuff is getting out of hand." I set down my mug harder than intended. "Out of hand?" Tom stepped forward. "You can't go 5 minutes without mentioning God or prayer or some Bible verse. Last week at dinner, you spent 20 minutes explaining why our waiter needed salvation." The guy was clearly struggling. He was doing his job. Leon interrupted. "And you made him uncomfortable by asking if he'd accepted Christ." The room fell silent except for the ticking of my wall clock. These were my people. We'd shared everything together. Late-night philosophy discussions, dreams about the future, fears about growing older. Now they stood in my living room looking at me like I'd become a stranger. "I found something real," I said quietly. "Something that changed everything for me. I thought you'd want to hear about it." Sarah's voice softened. "We know you're sincere, Joseph, but you've become obsessive. It's all you talk about anymore. Remember when we used to discuss movies, politics, our careers?" Tom added, "Now every conversation becomes a sermon." I felt heat rising in my chest. "So what are you saying? That I should hide the most important thing in my life to make you comfortable?" "We're saying you need to find balance," Leon said. "Your faith is fine. Keep it to yourself. Stop trying to convert everyone you meet." The words hung in the air like smoke. Keep it to yourself. As if what happened to me 6 months ago was just a hobby I'd picked up, something I could compartmentalize and tuck away when it became inconvenient for others. "And if I don't?" I asked. The three exchanged glances. Sarah took a deep breath. "Then maybe we need some space. From you. From all this religious talk. From feeling like we're constantly being judged for not believing what you believe." The ultimatum hit me like a physical blow. Choose your faith or choose your friends. 15 years of friendship reduced to this moment. But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly understand, was that my response was about to change everything. Not just for me, but for all of us. I stared at my three friends, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger, though I felt that too. Something deeper. A strange calm that I didn't expect. "You want me to stop talking about faith?" I said slowly. "Fine." They looked surprised. Sarah's eyebrows raised slightly. "But I have a challenge for you first. Give me 30 days. 30 days where you actually listen to why this matters so much to me. Not just the what, but the why. The real why." Tom crossed his arms. "Joseph, we don't want more preaching." "No preaching." I cut him off. "No Bible verses unless you ask. No trying to get you to pray or go to church. Just me sharing my story. The real story of what happened to me." Leon frowned. "What do you mean, what happened to you? You think I just woke up one day and decided to become religious? You think this is some phase I'm going through because I turned 35 and started questioning my life?" The three of them shifted uncomfortably. That's exactly what they thought. "There's something I haven't told you. About why I changed. About what really happened 6 months ago." Sarah leaned forward. "What are you talking about?" I walked to my window, looking out at the busy street below. People rushing to work, to appointments, to lives that seemed important but felt hollow. I used to be one of them. Remember when I took that weekend trip to Portland? When I said I needed to clear my head after the promotion fell through? They nodded. I didn't go to Portland. The room went quiet again. I went to see Dr. Williams. You remember him? My professor from college? He'd been calling me for weeks, saying he had something important to tell me. Something about the research project I worked on with him senior year. Tom's voice was cautious. "What research project?" "The one on near-death experiences." We interviewed dozens of people who'd been clinically dead and came back. I thought we were just collecting data for his psychology book. I turned to face them. Turns out Dr. Williams was dying. Pancreatic cancer. Had maybe 2 weeks left. And he wanted to tell me something he'd never put in any of his official reports. Leon was frowning now. Tell you what? That every single person we interviewed, every single one, described the same experience. The same presence. The same voice. And it wasn't just psychological. There were details, specific information these people couldn't possibly have known. Sarah shook her head. Joseph, near-death experiences are well documented. Oxygen deprivation to the brain causes hallucinations. That's what I thought too, until Dr. Williams showed me his private files. I walked to my desk and pulled out a manila folder I'd kept locked away for months. Medical records, verified accounts, people who came back knowing things that were happening in other parts of the hospital while they were unconscious. Conversations that took place in rooms they'd never been in. Details about people they'd never met. Tom was staring at the folder. Why didn't he publish this? Because he was scared. Scared of what it meant for his career, his reputation. But on his deathbed, he couldn't keep it to himself anymore. I set the folder on the coffee table between us. He told me something else. Something that made me drive straight from his hospice to the nearest church. The three of them were hanging on every word now. What? Sarah whispered. That the presence every person described, the voice they all heard, said the same thing. The exact same words, in the exact same order. My hands were trembling slightly as I opened the folder. And those words changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what happens after. Sarah reached for the folder first, but I pulled it back. Before you look at this, you need to understand something. Dr. Williams made me promise I'd never share these files unless I was absolutely certain the person was ready to have their entire worldview challenged. Leon laughed, but it sounded forced. Come on, Joseph. It's just research data. Is it? I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Patricia Chen, age 34, cardiac arrest during routine surgery. Clinically dead for 4 minutes and 18 seconds. I read from the transcript. Subject reported floating above her body and observing resuscitation efforts. She then described traveling through what she called a tunnel of light and encountering a presence that spoke to her. Tom was listening intently now. Here's where it gets interesting. Patricia described, in perfect detail, a conversation taking place in the hospital cafeteria between two doctors she'd never met. Security cameras confirmed this conversation happened exactly when she was unconscious on the operating table. I pulled out another file. David Martinez, age 67, massive heart attack. Dead for 6 minutes. He described not only the same presence and tunnel, but also knew that his daughter was on a plane from Chicago at that exact moment, even though she lived in Seattle and he had no idea she was traveling. Sarah's skeptical expression was wavering. How do you verify something like that? Phone records. Flight manifests. His daughter confirmed she was on an emergency flight to see him, but she hadn't told anyone yet because she didn't want to worry the family unnecessarily. I spread out 5 more files on the table. 7 different people. Different ages, backgrounds, medical conditions. All experienced clinical death. All came back with information they couldn't possibly have known. And all of them, every single one, reported the same encounter. Tom picked up one of the files. What kind of encounter? They met someone. Someone who knew everything about their lives. Their mistakes. Their secrets. Their deepest fears and greatest hopes. And this person told them the same thing. I paused, watching their faces. He told them that love was real. That forgiveness was possible. That death wasn't the end. But that the choices we make in this life determine what comes next. Leon was shaking his head. You're talking about what? Heaven? Hell? I'm talking about reality. About what actually happens when we die. And about why that changes everything about how we should live. Sarah was reading through Patricia Chen's file, her brow furrowed in concentration. Even if this is all true, she said slowly, even if these people really did experience something beyond clinical death, How do you jump from that to Christianity specifically? I smiled, because I'd been waiting for that question. Because of what happened next. After Dr. Williams showed me these files, I couldn't stop thinking about them. I started researching on my own, looking for similar cases. I found hundreds of them. Thousands. I pulled out my laptop and opened a document I'd been compiling for months. And here's what I discovered. The description of this presence, this person they all met, matches perfectly with historical accounts of Jesus Christ. Not the sanitized Sunday school version, but the real person described in ancient sources. Tom was staring at the screen. What do you mean? The way he spoke to them, the things he knew about them, the feeling of unconditional love combined with absolute truth, the sense that they were in the presence of someone who had experienced human suffering but had conquered it. I scrolled through page after page of testimonies. But most importantly, they all came back with the same message, that this person they met had died for them, had taken their place, had made it possible for them to be forgiven and accepted despite everything they'd done wrong. The room was completely silent now. My three friends sat staring at documents that challenged everything they thought they knew about reality. So when you ask me why I can't stop talking about faith, I continued, this is why. Because I've seen evidence that death isn't the end. That there's someone waiting for us who loves us more than we can imagine. And that the decisions we make right now, today, have eternal consequences. Sarah looked up from the files, her eyes wide. Joseph, if this is real, if even half of this is real, then everything changes. I finished. Everything we think matters doesn't matter. And everything we think doesn't matter is the only thing that does. Leon was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. Okay, let's say for a minute that these accounts are legitimate, that these people really did experience something beyond clinical death. He stopped and faced me. How do we know they weren't just experiencing some kind of shared psychological phenomenon? Maybe there's something hardwired into the human brain that creates these similar experiences when we're dying. That's what I thought at first too, I said. So I dug deeper. I pulled out another section of files, these ones marked with different colored tabs. These are accounts from people of different religious backgrounds. Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, agnostics, people who had never stepped foot in a Christian church. Tom picked up one of the files. And they all described the same thing? Not exactly. Here's where it gets really interesting. The people who came back all described meeting someone, but their interpretation of who that someone was varied based on their background and beliefs. I opened a file marked Ahmed Hassan, age 42, Muslim. Ahmed described meeting a figure of light who spoke to him about mercy and forgiveness. He was certain it was a prophet, but when he described the specific words this figure spoke, they match almost exactly with what the Christians in the study reported. Sarah was following along in another file. What about the atheists? That's the most compelling part. The self-described atheists and agnostics couldn't categorize what they experienced. They just knew they had encountered someone who knew them completely and loved them unconditionally. Someone who had suffered and died for them. I showed them a transcript from Dr. Williams' interview with Jennifer Walsh, a philosophy professor who had spent years arguing against the existence of God. Listen to what she told Dr. Williams. I met someone who changed everything I thought I knew about reality. I don't know what to call him, but he showed me that love is the fundamental force of the universe. That everything we do matters because of how it affects our connection to this love. And that he had somehow made it possible for people like me, people who had rejected him, to be accepted anyway. Leon sat down heavily. What happened to these people after they recovered? Did they change? Every single one of them. Completely. The Christians became more compassionate and less judgmental. The Muslims started emphasizing mercy over law. The atheists, well, most of them aren't atheists anymore. I pulled up a photo on my laptop. This is Jennifer Walsh today. She's a pastor now. Started a church specifically for people who struggle with faith and doubt. Tom was staring at the photo. You're telling me a philosophy professor who argued against God's existence became a pastor because of a near-death experience? I'm telling you that evidence changed her mind, just like it changed mine. Sarah closed the file she'd been reading and looked up at me. Joseph, why didn't you tell us this before? Why all the Bible verses and evangelism attempts instead of just showing us this research? I sat down across from her, feeling suddenly tired. Because I was scared. Scared you'd think I'd lost my mind. Scared you'd dismiss it all as religious nonsense without even looking at the evidence. I gestured toward the files spread across the table. And I was right, wasn't I? If I had started with this 6 months ago, would you have listened? The three of them exchanged glances, and I could see the answer in their faces. So I tried the traditional approach. Sharing Bible verses, talking about faith, trying to convince you through argument and emotion. But that didn't work either. Leon was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question I'd been dreading. Joseph, have you experienced anything like this yourself? Have you had some kind of encounter? I took a deep breath. This was the part I'd never told anyone. Not exactly, but something happened to me after I left Dr. Williams. Something that made all of this research feel personal instead of just academic. Sarah leaned forward. What happened? I need you to promise me you'll hear me out completely before you respond, because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy. But it's the truth. They all nodded. After I left the hospice, I was driving home and I couldn't stop thinking about those files, about what it meant if they were true, about what it meant for my life, for my relationships, for everything I thought I understood about reality. I paused, remembering that night clearly. I pulled over at a rest stop and just sat there for hours. And for the first time in my adult life, I prayed. Really prayed. Not the casual God help me pass this test prayers from college, but a real, desperate conversation. Tom was watching me intently, and something answered. I didn't hear a voice or see a bright light. I continued, watching their faces carefully. It wasn't like the near-death experiences in those files. But something happened that night that I can't explain through psychology or neuroscience or any rational framework. Leon was leaning forward now, his skepticism mixed with genuine curiosity. What do you mean something answered? I stood up and walked to the window again, trying to find the right words. You know how sometimes you can sense when someone is watching you? Even when you can't see them, you just know someone's attention is focused on you. They nodded. It was like that, but infinitely more intense. Like suddenly becoming aware that someone who knew everything about me. Every thought I'd ever had, every mistake I'd ever made, every secret I'd kept, was right there with me. Sarah's voice was soft. Were you scared? Terrified, but also relieved? Like I'd been carrying this enormous weight my entire life and suddenly realized I could set it down. I turned back to face them. And then I understood something that changed everything. All those years of feeling like something was missing. Like there was this hole inside me that nothing could fill. Career success, relationships, achievements, experiences, suddenly made sense. Tom was frowning. What do you mean? I realized that what I'd been searching for my whole life was connection. Real connection. Not just with other people, but with whatever force created us, loves us, and gives our lives meaning. I sat back down and opened the folder to a page I'd marked with a sticky note. Dr. Williams wrote something in his personal notes that he never showed me until that last conversation. He said that after interviewing all these people who'd experienced clinical death, he began to understand that human beings are hardwired for a relationship with the divine. Leon was reading over my shoulder. He theorized that all human longing for love, for purpose, for meaning, is actually longing for connection with God. And that nothing else can truly satisfy that longing because nothing else is what we're designed for. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then asked, "So what happened after you had this experience?" I started reading. Not just the Bible, but everything I could find about Christianity from a historical and archaeological perspective. I wanted to know if there was real evidence for the claims that Jesus made about himself. I pulled out another folder, this one much thicker. And what I found surprised me. The historical evidence for Jesus' existence, his death, and the claims about his resurrection is actually stronger than the evidence for most other ancient historical figures we accept without question. Tom looked skeptical again. Come on, Joseph. You're talking about someone rising from the dead. I'm talking about the most documented event in ancient history. More manuscripts, more eyewitness accounts, more contemporary references than Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great. I opened the folder to show them photocopies of ancient documents. These are copies of manuscripts dating back to within decades of Jesus' death. Letters written by people who claimed to have seen him after his crucifixion. Not just his close followers, but skeptics who became believers after encountering him. Leon was examining one of the documents. How do we know these are authentic? Same way we verify any historical document. Multiple sources, archaeological corroboration, textual analysis. The scholarly consensus, even among non-Christian historians, is that Jesus existed, was crucified, and that his followers genuinely believed they had seen him alive after his death. Sarah was shaking her head. But belief doesn't make something true. You're right. But something caused a group of terrified disciples to transform into bold evangelists willing to die for their message. Something convinced thousands of Jews to abandon centuries of religious tradition. Something turned the Roman Empire upside down. I pulled out a timeline I'd created showing the rapid spread of Christianity in the first century. Within 30 years of Jesus' death, there were Christian communities throughout the Roman Empire. People were willing to face persecution, imprisonment, and execution rather than deny their belief that Jesus had risen from the dead. Tom was studying the timeline. People die for false beliefs all the time. True, but they don't usually die for beliefs they know are false. The apostles weren't dying for a philosophical idea or a religious teaching. They were dying for their claim to have personally witnessed Jesus alive after his crucifixion. I leaned back in my chair. Here's what convinced me. I realized that I had two choices. Either these were the most successful liars in human history, or they were telling the truth about what they experienced. Leon was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "What made you decide they were telling the truth?" "The same thing that's making me tell you all of this despite knowing you might think I've lost my mind. Because once you encounter something real, something that explains everything you've been searching for your entire life, you can't keep it to yourself." The room fell silent. My three friends sat surrounded by documents and evidence that challenged their fundamental assumptions about reality. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Joseph, if even half of what you're showing us is true, what does that mean for us? For our lives? For how we're supposed to live?" I smiled, because that was exactly the question I'd hoped she'd ask. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for the past 6 months. And what I've discovered is going to surprise you even more than everything I've shown you so far." "The biggest surprise wasn't learning that God exists," I continued. "It was learning what he's actually like." I pulled out one final folder. This one labeled Personal Research. Everything I thought I knew about Christianity was wrong. All the stereotypes, all the judgmental attitudes, all the rules and regulations that make people uncomfortable. That's not what it's really about. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Then what is it about?" "Freedom. Real freedom. For the first time in my life, I understand what it means to be truly free from guilt, from shame, from the constant pressure to prove myself worthy of love and acceptance." I opened the folder to reveal pages of handwritten notes. "You want to know why I couldn't stop talking about faith? Because I discovered that everything I'd been striving for, success, approval, significance, I already had. Not because of anything I'd done, but because of what Jesus did." Sarah was looking confused. "I don't understand." "Think about it. What drives most of our behavior? Fear, right? Fear that we're not good enough, that we won't be loved, that our lives don't matter. We spend our entire lives trying to prove ourselves." I gestured toward my friends. "Leon, you work 60-hour weeks trying to make partner because you're afraid of being seen as unsuccessful. Sarah, you've been in 3 relationships in the past 2 years, but you keep sabotaging them because you're afraid of being truly known and rejected. Tom, you make jokes about everything because you're afraid of being vulnerable and having people see the real you." The accuracy of my observations was written on their faces. But what if all of that striving was unnecessary? What if you were already accepted, already loved, already valuable, regardless of your performance or achievements? Leon was shaking his head. That sounds nice in theory, but it's not how the real world works. You're right. It's not how the world works, but it's how God works. And that changes everything. I pulled out a page of notes I'd written after my first month of really studying Christian theology. I learned that the core message of Christianity isn't be good enough to earn God's love. It's God loves you so much that he became human and died in your place to remove every barrier between you and him. Tom was frowning. What does that mean practically? It means you can stop pretending, stop performing, stop trying to earn love and acceptance. You already have it. I looked at each of them. Remember how you said I'd become obsessive about faith? You were right, but not for the reasons you think. I became obsessive because for the first time in my life, I felt truly alive. Like I'd been sleepwalking for 35 years and suddenly woke up. Sarah was listening intently now. You know what the biggest change has been? I'm not angry anymore. I used to carry this constant low-level frustration with people, with situations, with life in general. I was always comparing myself to others, always feeling like I was falling short or being treated unfairly. I stood up and walked to a photo on my bookshelf, a picture of all of us from last year's vacation. But when you really understand that you're completely loved and accepted by the creator of the universe, all of that competitive striving just stops. You don't need to prove yourself anymore. You don't need to win arguments or be right or make sure everyone knows how successful you are. Leon was studying the photo too. Is that why you've been different lately? Not just the religious talk, but calmer. Exactly. When you know who you are and whose you are, everything else becomes less urgent, less desperate. I turned back to them. But here's the thing I couldn't figure out how to tell you. This isn't just about me. Everything I've discovered, everything that's changed my life, it's available to you too. Tom crossed his arms. And there's the sales pitch. I laughed, surprising all of us. See, that's what I thought too. I thought Christianity was about trying to get people to believe something so you could feel validated in your beliefs. But it's not. I sat back down. It's about sharing the best news you've ever heard with people you care about. It's like finding a cure for cancer and not being able to keep quiet about it. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then asked, Joseph, what exactly are you asking us to do? I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just telling you that everything I've shown you today, the research, the historical evidence, the personal transformation, it's all pointing to the same conclusion. I looked at each of them, that there's a God who loves you unconditionally, who knows everything about you and accepts you completely, who's made it possible for you to have a relationship with him that will satisfy every longing you've ever had. The room was completely quiet. And if that's true, if even the possibility exists that it's true, then isn't it worth investigating for yourself? Leon was the first to break the silence. Joseph, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. I nodded. Do you really believe that we're going to hell if we don't accept what you're telling us? I had been waiting for this question, and I knew my answer would determine everything about our future friendship. 6 months ago, I would have given you the standard evangelical answer about salvation and damnation. But after studying this for months, after really digging into what Jesus actually taught, I've come to a different understanding. I pulled out my Bible, the first time I'd opened it in front of them. Jesus talked more about abundant life than he did about avoiding hell. His message was primarily about how to live fully and meaningfully right now. Tom looked surprised. What do you mean? I mean that the question isn't really, what happens to me after I die? It's what kind of life am I living right now? Am I living in fear or in love? Am I driven by selfishness or by service to others? Am I finding my identity in temporary things or in eternal things? I flipped to a passage I'd marked. Jesus said, I have come that they may have life, and have it abundantly. He wasn't just talking about life after death. He was talking about a quality of life that's available right now. Sarah was looking thoughtful. So you don't think we're damned if we don't believe? I think we're already living in a kind of hell when we're disconnected from the source of love and meaning. I think we damn ourselves to lives of emptiness and striving and fear when we try to find our significance in things that can't ultimately satisfy. I closed the Bible and looked at my 3 closest friends. What I'm offering you isn't fire insurance. It's not a cosmic get-out-of-jail-free card. It's a completely different way of understanding your value, your purpose, and your relationship with the universe. Leon was nodding slowly. Okay, but what does that look like practically? If we were to explore this, what would that mean? It means starting where you are, with honest questions and genuine curiosity. It means being open to the possibility that there's more to reality than what you can see and measure. I gathered up the files and folders we'd been discussing. It means investigating the evidence for yourself instead of dismissing it because it challenges your existing beliefs. It means considering the possibility that the longing you feel for something more, for love, for meaning, for connection, might actually be pointing you towards something real. Tom stood up and walked to the window where I'd been standing earlier. Joseph, what if we're not ready for all of this? What if we need time to process everything you've shared? Then take time. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is God. I smiled at him. But I hope you understand now why I couldn't just keep this to myself. Why I had to share it with the people I care about most. Sarah was gathering her things, but she paused. What happens to our friendship if we investigate all of this and come to different conclusions than you have? Then we love each other anyway. We respect each other's journey. We stay friends regardless of what we believe about God. I looked at all 3 of them, because that's what I've learned about real faith. It doesn't make you judgmental or exclusive or superior. It makes you more loving, more accepting, more willing to meet people where they are. Leon was at the door now, but he turned back. Joseph, can I borrow some of those files? I'd like to read through them more carefully. Take whatever you want, and when you're ready to talk about what you find, I'll be here. As my friends prepared to leave, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not the anxious urgency I'd felt for months, trying to convince them through arguments and pressure. Just quiet confidence that truth has a way of making itself known to those who genuinely seek it. One more thing, Sarah said from the doorway. What you shared today, it's not what I expected at all. When I think of Christianity, I think of judgment and rules and people trying to control other people's behavior. I know, that's what I thought too. But what I discovered is that real faith is about freedom, not control. About grace, not performance. About love, not judgment. She smiled for the first time all day. Maybe that's worth exploring. After they left, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence that had changed my life. But more than the files and research and historical documentation, what mattered was the transformation I'd experienced. The peace, the purpose, the sense of being truly known and unconditionally loved. My friends had asked me to stop talking about faith, but my response had surprised them. Instead of becoming defensive or backing down, I'd shared the real reason why faith had become so central to my life. Not because I was trying to convert them, but because I'd discovered something so valuable that keeping it to myself would have been the most unloving thing I could do. Whether they ultimately came to the same conclusions I had wasn't up to me. My job was simply to share the truth as I'd experienced it, and let that truth speak for itself. And sometimes that's exactly what truth does. It speaks for itself in ways that no amount of arguing or persuasion ever could. What lesson or insight from Joseph's journey resonates most with you? Is it possible to share our deepest beliefs with others while still respecting their freedom to choose their own path?